Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of SuperFantaFi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Evil, Season 4, Episode 3. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I want to start off with David's side of things. Obviously, he's being tested again about his remote viewing. I made sure to remember the term this episode because I was struggling to remember it last episode. But either way, he's testing it out again. Well, the father, the new priest, is testing it out again, but it's not. There's no success. Because I was about to say, like, how do you even really trigger that in David? It's not something he can really control. I mean, he has these visions, but he came about those by getting high. But that's no longer what he does anymore. Because Andrea helped him through just letting that come naturally rather than getting high, if I remember correctly. But either way, he kind of couldn't help out with this situation until later on he just randomly has a vision. And I love how that was depicted, where it's the vision starts off with the angel and it's light, and then all of a sudden it almost looked like, at first I was like, is the vision getting corrupted? And I don't know if that's indicative of anything, or it was that just a transitionary thing because of the nature of what the vision was. But his visions aren't always as visceral as that one was. He's surrounded by the dead bodies. I'm like, I don't think it's ever been like that before. But it turns out that this particular vision, he was basically in this general in Ethiopia who's kind of like this warlord or whatever, or dictator. And it turns out that there's 8 priests that are going to be in danger. So that's what the father wanted David to look for. And he calls it, what was it? PSI, what was it? Perfect sight immersion. It's rather than just seeing the events, you literally become the person. So he became that person, which David was not too keen on that idea, because he's for one, you can't count on me. Because all I see are possibilities. Nothing's guaranteed. I mean, it's just kind of this is how things could go. Maybe it couldn't go this way. So he felt like, I'm not someone you should really count on in this regard. But for the dude, it's yeah, but you're all I've got. You're the only means we have of helping this situation. So I'm going to put faith in you, even if you might not have full faith in it yourself. The fact is, I have to, because it's all we have. And it's interesting too, and I'm curious to see how this progresses going forward, because David's visions have never had the negative effect on him like this PSI situation has, where by putting himself, immersing himself, and becoming the person he's remote viewing, he becomes them, and their negative emotions and stuff attaches themselves to him. So it's that's why I feel like the corrosion of the vision, where it was light and bright, and then it kind of diluted, got corrupted, and became the vision. I think that's supposed to represent the fact of the negative impact it has on how it affects David. Throughout the episode, he's angry later on, and he kind of starts wondering yeah, maybe that's why, because of that that remote viewing thing is kind of made me very angry. So all the while that's happening, we have Ben's circumstances. He's now medicating himself, trying to deal with seeing the jinn, which it seems like it's helping to some extent, but he's slowly medicating himself. I think it is interesting that who knows what the natural dose is he's supposed to take, but he's trying to find out the minimum amount he needs to take for it to go away. So he ended up getting up to basically 2 pills, which was 36 milligrams, I believe. So we don't know where that went. We know at least 18 wasn't enough. So he doubled it up and made it 16. Made it 36. So we don't know where that stands, whether or not that, but it's it made, by squinting his, at 18, he was able to squint his eyes and kind of eventually get rid of the jinn, but he could still hear the voice, and it's basically saying Kurt was trying to get you hooked on drugs. Have you heard of Big Pharma? It was it's so interesting hearing this jinn talk about Big Pharma like that. So that's going to be interesting to see where that progresses. And obviously Kristen's still dealing with the Andy situation. I would assume that Leland and Cheryl, more so Leland than anything, hasn't been able to get Andy since then. To be fair, he didn't Len answer the phone last episode, so he probably hasn't been able to kind of brainwash him to bring him forth. So he's probably waning off of it. Still doesn't change the fact that it's from a psychological thing. He doesn't understand it, but we know, once again, because he was put on those shelves and kind of by Leland and Cheryl, that he sleeps under the bed and is still there. It was actually kind of sweet when Kristen kind of crawled under the bed to kind of sleep with him because it's like, all right, stuff's going on with Andy. To the point she's trying to get Kurt to look at him, which they're kind of repairing their relationship, which catch up a little bit more with Kurt this episode, how he's getting rid of like the thing that makes him right, because he's like, yeah, I kind of went a little crazy there, throwing it away. Turns out his secretary works for Ben, Leland, which makes sense. Of course, like, you're going to have an investment in all of this. Like, you already set all this stuff up with Andy. He's already kind of an investment. You already set up all this stuff with Kurt, which he's an investment. So we never cut back to it this episode, but Leland did say he was going to try and get to Kurt. Specifically, he wanted to use Kristen as a means to find out what Kristen knows about him, to kind of use him as a weapon, which Cheryl's not too keen on helping Leland with anything, because it's like, cool, I'm going to show you up, which I appreciate. Like, she's gathering the forces at the office. It's like her and 5 other women. It's like, yo, you've done this. I mean, look at you, Leslie. You were literally carrying the Antichrist. And it's like, so, like, look at all these bastards. They're thinking they're better than us. Leland comes in being like, oh, look at what you got here. Oh, ain't that cute. Like, he kind of has that type of energy about it. And it just makes... As I suggested last episode, it's like, well, I could see Cheryl killing the manager and kind of taking over things. And she's kind of like, yeah, let's kind of stage a coup at this operation. Because it's like, right, let's not just like quit and protest. It's like, no, let's run things. But before we could get any further than that, Leslie goes into labor. So, I mean, definitely hasn't been to 30 days yet, has it? I mean, who knows how much time has passed, in between, in over the course of episodes, but also in between episodes. Because it's like, the last time Kristen talked about was last episode, she specifically said 30 days. So, like, the baby coming sooner, like, doesn't that kind of mess with the prophecy? Or maybe it's specifically about, like, well, the baby came early, but maybe once we got to that 38-day mark in the show, maybe that will be like, oh, this is the moment it all really pops off. The baby coming, like, maybe a week or two early might not be the biggest impact, or maybe that 30 days passed that much in between, like, the events of between last episode and this episode, in conjunction with the fact is, like, maybe multiple days passed over the course of this episode. Because at one point, when referencing like the vision he had and the remote viewing, David did mention, like, oh, that's why I've been feeling like this the past few days, even though in the context of the show it feels like that might have been like the night before. So I'm kind of been talking about, like, the individual storylines and everyone. I need to circle back and kind of talk about the main overarching plot this episode, and kind of then eventually branch back out to, especially, like, Kristen and Cheryl's side of things. But either way, reining it back to, like, the main plot of the episode, it turns out that David, Ben, and Kristen are to investigate possessed bacon. Well, possessed pigs, because we got the vid tap thing back, and it's like, right, people doing this possessed pig challenge of, like, okay, like, you eat, like, this specific brand of pork, and it's like, it ends up, like, making you go crazy. So they go to the farm to check out the pigs. The dad who runs the farm, I was like, what have I seen that actor in most recently? I was like, I know he was in the Lethal Weapon TV show, and I feel like there was something after that I saw him in, and I just can't remember what it was off the top of my head. I feel like, yeah, like, the Lethal Weapon TV show is the thing that immediately came to my mind, but I was like, there's something else, and I just can't remember what it was. But I mean, everything at first kind of seems above board. It wasn't until Kristen cut her leg and the pig started acting weird, I was like, they attracted to blood. I was like, that's weird. And we never dealt with that until we got to the end of the episode, because I was like, that, once again, the show does a really good job of, like, planting the seeds, and you're like, okay, is that going to come back? Oh, and there it is. It comes back around of, like, yeah, they were planting the seeds early on for it to be like, because Ben finds out later on that the pigs, well, I'm skipping a lot of steps before I even get to that. Because initially it's like, well, everything seems above board. Like, what could be wrong with this place? There's a guy who runs the farm next door who's been spying on them with, like, a drone. That's how he does his farming. And we see, like, the son, his name is Sebastian. He was, like, running on all four, acting weird. You're like, what the fuck is that? So, turns out the trio, the Trio of God, is that their name? They're, like, these 3 women who, like, performed exorcism, but they're kind of amateur exorcists. And yeah, Which, when I immediately saw that, I was like, is that supposed to be like a wink and nod to Charmed? Because I'm like, well, here we have three beautiful women connected to supernatural stuff. I'm like, it kind of feels like that's supposed to be like a wink and nod to Charm, but maybe not. Maybe just like it's the Charm fan of me is just reading too much into that. But it feels too. It's like, oh, the trio of God. It's like very much like, if you don't know the Charmed ones, they're referenced as the power of three. So like it feels like that was intentional, but I'm just not sure. I want to believe that it's supposed to be like a wink and nod to Charm, but whatever the case may be. Essentially, they have dealt with exorcism. I love the back and forth they have with David, where they're kind of like, right, there's nothing in the Bible that says you have to do anything special. They're basically kind of saying like Catholics invented a lot of stuff that's kind of BS. It's like holy water, this or that. You don't have to actually be like ordained or whatever, or properly trained. Like anyone could be an exorcist if you have the power of Jesus on your side. And it turns out that they removed a demon from Sebastian, but the problem is, well, because the point is you're supposed to put him inside of some nearby pigs. It's kind of a story from the Bible. But the problem is the pigs are supposed to jump and like drown themselves, which I feel like they didn't cover this in the story. You think of like, oh, like when something dies in water, how it affects the water. I'm like, you think possessed pigs dying in water, but I'm like, I guess demon possession doesn't work like that. Like unless you have a vessel to jump into, like it just shrivel ups and dies with its host in that regard. But I would have expected like, wouldn't some of that leak into the water? You know, maybe just part of the story that just never got covered. But yeah, the pigs are not dead. They're still alive. But it's like, well, we told Garcia that he was supposed to like kill the pigs, but he never did. And that's when Ben investigating on his own out in the cornfield, which is like nothing good ever happens in a cornfield, especially a cornfield at night, which we've had the cornfield situation before, because wasn't that like season 2 when David met up with his dad and Kristen was with him? It was like part of that happened in a cornfield, and that was like, what the fuck? Cause wasn't there like a demonic pregnancy situation that happened that Kristen like witnessed? Was it? That might have been season 1, but I could have sworn that was season 2. I just don't remember. Either way, Ben was out there and he came across a cemetery, like where some bodies were buried, because it's like connected to the next farm, because there was like a barrier that I was like, that barrier looks like if the Hulk ran through it. It was like the metal was like bit and split open. I'm like, could a normal pig do that? What the? And then we see like a mutated pig. I was like, holy shit, like something straight out of a like freaking like horror movie. I was like, that seems so disturbing. And it turns out, because we saw one of the bodies, I was like, okay, that's when it clicked in my head. I'm like, are these eating human flesh or something? Because I was like, that looked, well, I was like, who knows how fresh that body was, but like whatever skin was left on it might have gotten eaten. And this pig then proceeded to eat other pigs, and you're like, wait, what? So it turns out, I'd never heard of this term before. And it's like, it's so weird once again when you have terms that you're kind of like, it makes sense in context. Like the term for like feeding pigs to another pig, it saves you on food, is feedback. Which once again, in the context of what the term word feedback means, it makes sense. You know, it's like, oh, like when you hear like, oh, you're getting feedback on something, it's like, it's so interesting to think about like that use in this context. It's like, it makes sense, but it's still weird that like that term is used in this regard. It's so interesting. It's like, and it is something legal, which I'm like, oh, how often does that happen then, like in real life? If that's kind of like, I mean, I'm sure it varies from state to state on legality, but I'm like, oh, that's interesting. It's like a go-to move done by people to save on like food and stuff. But the problem is that regardless of it all, these pigs have gained a taste for human flesh. Like they go a little insane. Apparently there was like a news story, Ben was like, yeah, they actually ate a farmer. So there's that. And even if you didn't want to, even if you didn't want to acknowledge like, okay, they were possessed by demons and now like that's causing even more issue, it's like, even if you want to go down the supernatural route, it's still like these pigs are kind of infected and are kind of like neuro issues going on there if they're kind of acting crazy like this and digging up a dead body and being super aggressive to the point of trying to kill Ben. So, and they try to like force them to sign some NDAs, but they're like, nah, fuck that. So I don't know if we'll cut back to this farm situation, because it's like that is going to cut into their business once that kind of gets out there, the dangers of it. So that's definitely going to like cause issues. Their competitor, who's like once again the farm over from them, is going to benefit from this. So I'm sure he's going to be happy in the long run. I did forget to talk in the context of all this. I did love the conversation. Well, because David and Kristen kind of had an argument, which I thought this would play into what Leland wanted, and once again, just to kind of push Kristen even further away from David and stuff like that. And that was what the whole point of the Andy situation was supposed to play into, that kind of isolate Kristen even more. I thought this argument was going to lead into that, because it is the conversation about how, right, David's kind of saying like there's only one truth, where she's like, right, it's all about perspective. Your truth is your truth, mine is mine, and we can coexist, but we won't always see things, because like she talks about like, right, for a moment I was so into the God thing. If Andy was brought back, I'd take the kids to mass every day, and I did. But it's like the weight of all that demons, God, religion, it was too much. And now that it's all gone, I feel happy. I can also see why David was already in aggro mode because of the remote viewing, but also it is that, once again, him and Kristen have like respected each other, but have also professionally bumped heads in the past. Over the course of the show, it's gotten better as things have gotten over the course of the show, as things have progressed, but it's still the issue of, it's religion versus science type of conversation that's always been prevalent in this show. But it was this beautiful moment of honesty where Ben was kind of like, yeah, I've been seeing stuff. And it's like, wait, what? It's like, oh, do you think this is related to particle accelerator? He's like, maybe, but I've also been taking medication to kind of deal with it. I've been seeing a djinn. So it's like, oh, this kind of nice moment of honesty between them. I'd also forgot to talk about the particle accelerator, because David did note, like, not only in last episode but even this episode are happening in a certain mile radius of the particle accelerator. So it's interesting, like, obviously the season is leaning more science fictional in its regards, but still having that supernatural demon element to it, but also that it seems like everything is going to correlate and coalesce around the particle accelerator. So if it's the second thing that's happened in that vicinity, it's kind of interesting. Once again, it is supposed to be the gate to hell and stuff. So, but anyway, Ben being honest made David be honest. He's like, right, I've been interacting with the entity, they've been testing out remote viewing, and they're like, wait, you serious? He's like, yeah. He kind of opens up about it, and I love that it's like, Kristen's like, all right, pull over, we've got to hug it out. And David's like, no. Ben's like, if you don't, she's going to sing. So I was like, all right, let's do it. They was on the side of the road hugging it out. It's actually really beautiful and cathartic. And I love a guy walks by, drives by with a Confederate flag honking. And I just love Ben being like, okay, so a black guy, a Muslim, and a white lady hugging on the side of the road. Yeah, we need to go before we get shot. And everyone's just kind of in agreement. It's like, yeah. I was like, I had to rewind it because I'm like, I love that line. So that's where things kind of stand on that front. And so the pig situation is resolved for now, but we'll see whether there ends up being more to it or not. We didn't see any demonic symbols associated with this, but even with like the packaging of the meat or something, so who knows if there's going to be anything more from that, but we'll see. Other than that, we also had the situation with Leslie, once again going into labor, and it wasn't until like the shoes popped up, I was like, that's not who I think it is. I was like, it can't be, and then they zoomed up. I was like, yeah, it's Nurse. What was her name? Block or Bloach? I forgot what her name was now. Squeaky. I was like, wow. I was like, has she popped up since? Wasn't that a season? I can't remember if that was a season 1 episode or was that a season 2 episode. I legitimately don't remember. I want to say it was a season 1 episode, wasn't it? It's a later episode of the season. Wasn't it like episode 8 or something? Might have been 6. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I remember it's an episode that revolves around David being in a hospital. But I was like, wow. I like legitimately don't remember if she ever popped up again in season 2 or 3. But her being at DF, it's like, okay, it makes sense that she'd be on staff. So I was like, well, that's interesting having like this angel of death be your doctor for the Antichrist. Feels kind of interesting, which I love that like at one point like she overheard Leland and the nurse talking about feeding her to the baby, and she's like, oh my god, they're trying to do that. She's like, and for Cheryl to be like, oh, you're crazy. She's like, I'm literally giving birth to the Antichrist. That in itself is fucking crazy. Them wanting to feed me to the baby is normal kinds of crazy. It's like, yeah, when you think about it like that. I don't know why like Cheryl would think that's so asinine, but I guess it's like, right, why would they do that to the mother of the Antichrist? It's like, well, she isn't actually the mother. Well, she is the mother that's giving birth to it, but she's not the birth mother, because they've kind of made a point that they kind of want Kristen to be in the picture. That's what the whole point is, to kind of bring her in. But I mean, the way Cheryl, it's so interesting considering like how deep into this you are, how you've manipulated your daughter, how you've kind of, your granddaughters are mixed up in this, but it's still the thing of you're still a part of this, but you're still claiming to be trying to protect your daughter and your grandchildren. You know, mixed messages there. It feels kind of hypocritical, because it's like you can't have it one way. It's either or, not and. Because she wants to have this job and keep her family. It's like, well, especially considering this place, maybe it's Leland, but it seems like this place in general has plans for your child and your grandchildren. So you think you'd be kind of no mas about that. They're not good with that, but. And she ends up bringing up to the nurse, I was hoping you were going to at least be subtle about it. It's like, no, you straight up asked her about it. And her being like, no, what? She's crazy, yada, yada, yada. We got to make sure we keep her medicated, you know, because of the pain and stuff. And just kind of smiles and walks away squeaking. But then Leland comes to her later on and it's like, oh no, what you heard was right, but we're not talking about you. We're talking about the birth mother feeding her. It's like, so is that your plan? You definitely don't want Cheryl to know that. So your plan is to kill Chris and eventually feed her to the baby. I mean, I guess it's kind of that patricide thing of, I'm sure in the animal kingdom or something, or insect kingdom, like I know there's the whole like the mothers killing the fathers type of thing, but I don't know if like, there's got to be some situation in some creatures in life that the babies eat the parent, like a patricide thing, like it's just a natural process. It's something that I also didn't give thought to as either. It's like, it is interesting that out of the 5 kids Kristen has, 4 of them are girls, and the one boy she has ends up being the Antichrist. I'm like, I don't know if like I'm reading too much into that. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, is the Antichrist just meant to be a boy? I'm not trying to make some parallel of like, oh my god, men are the ultimate evil. I mean, maybe there's something to that, just like the Adam and Eve of it all. I mean, just because of the Eve situation from a biblical standpoint, you'd actually make it seem like, I don't know, kind of think the narrative would make it so like, oh, I mean, also one of your daughters is kind of mixed up in the, what was it, like her, I don't remember the age. I know the two of her 2 middle children. I never remember which one, like, the oldest. The one that ended up being has a tail, the one that's like the closest one to Cheryl. Like, I don't remember. I don't know if she's like the second oldest or she's the third oldest. She might be the second oldest. I don't remember. But, like, my point is, like, she has her role in the demons and shit. So I'm like I said, I don't know, from a biblical standpoint, the narrative of like Eve being the one that was tempted, yada yada yada, you'd almost make it seem like women biblically are supposed to be like gave into evil. So that's why it almost feels like with Christian circumstances it would make more sense for you. But also at the same time, it's like, let's not forget this whole organization is super against women. They made that perfectly clear. So they probably have an issue if it turns out like, oh, the Antichrist is a woman? Ugh. No, Antichrist can't be a woman. No. You know, so maybe that'd be a part of it. I don't know. Like I said, probably reading way too much into it, but I think that is such an interesting thing. Like, oh, I think there is supposed to be more to the fact is that her one boy child ends up being the Antichrist. I think there is something to that. She initially wanted nothing to do with the baby until, like, Leslie called her up. And I was like, oh, interesting. Because she ignored the first call. I was like, oh, is she not going to answer the second one? And she's like, yeah, just go back to the hospital. It was like, but then brought up nurse, I can't remember the name now. It's something with a B. I can't remember if it's like Block or Bolch. I can't remember what her name was. But that's what kind of got Kristen's attention. She was there with the Leslie trying to ease her into all of this. Wanted nothing initially to do with the baby until she has to hold the baby, and then I think those maternal instincts kind of kick in. I mean, obviously she's got 4 children, so she has experience with it, but having the child in her hands is just one thing else. And then like it's like, oh, you're gonna feed the baby. I was like, breastfeed the baby? She's not lactating right now, but I'm like, oh, like the bottle and everything. So I'm like, okay, we're getting closer to Kristen feeding the baby in regard to her body. But, well, we know Leslie set that up because Leland was like, hey, you could be useful to get to Kristen. And it's like, well, because At no point did Leslie go, they're trying to feed you to the baby. It's like, no, it's just me. I mean, not unless I misinterpret that, but it seemed like they were referencing, like, no, we need Kristen to be fed to the baby, not you. But not unless I misinterpret that scene. It's like, no, you're going to be fed to the baby. But it's like, no, because he was expressly saying, like, we're not doing that. It's going to be Kristen we feed to the baby. So I don't know. Maybe, like, I feel like that's what that was saying. I don't think I was misconstruing that, but maybe I was. That maybe that's why she's deciding to work with him, because it's like, well, I'd rather it be you than me. And she definitely didn't say anything to Kristen about, like, potentially being fed to the baby. So she's definitely playing them. So interesting, considering, like, she was like, I mean, you were going through it, you were going through labor, you were in such intense pain, you're like, this is a motherfucker. Of course you didn't want to be like, you're like, I'm done, I don't want to do this. It's like, well, it's kind of hard to back out now when the Antichrist is this far in advance. The pregnancy is going this far. You can't really back out now. I mean, in a effed up way you could, considering, like, well, it is the Antichrist, so, but I mean, that would probably put you in danger in the process of trying to, kill the Antichrist while it's still in your belly type of thing, so. Some very, very interesting circumstances all around. I'm curious to see where all this takes us going forward into the next episode. Will Kristen, like, still be latching on to the baby? And how long before Leland makes his move? Once again, like, we didn't see him make his move against Kurt, but he probably set some stuff in motion. Is he going to try and get back Andy? Because Andy did, like, well, him and the girls were gone when Kristen went home before Leslie called her, so I don't know if that's indicative of anything. And maybe because of everything Andy's been going through recently, maybe the girls are going to be more keen on looking after their dad, so maybe Leland won't be able to make any moves on Andy right now. We'll ultimately have to wait to see where all of this ends up taking us. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.